The state is a creature of statute. So what that means is that everything that happens within the state, and no matter at what level of government it happens, is based on legislation. So every little act that you do as an official or a CEO or executive in a state-owned environment is basically, guided by legislation. And of course, the foundational legislation of our state, insofar as government departments and entities are concerned, is the Public Finance Management Act. All actions relating to the management of institution from a financial and governance point of view somehow is maintained in the Public Finance Management Act. For example, Section 54 thereof would tell you the type of exemptions and requirements you may need from Treasury if you want, for example, to deviate or use exceptional circumstances for you to achieve your goal. So you have the PFMA. Then, of course, you have internally, you would have your internal policies, which will be built on the PFMA and all other founding legislation of the organization. Then, of course, you would then, also have the King Code, the King Code 4, which, of course, colleagues, is very important to understand why King 4 is so important. And the reason is that prior to King 4, there was a lot of confusion during King 3 and even, going back to King 1 around the applicability of King 4 on government departments, vis-a-vis the Public Finance Management Act and all other legislation that are applicable. So some people would argue that the language and the way in which the King Code was crafted at the time simply seems to be speaking to corporates. And King 4 became important because it had to redefine who it applies to. And of course, the state the King 4 applies to the state as well. And that's why the language in King 4 was changed. There was less emphasis on corporates, and there was more emphasis on talking about organizations, entities, and so forth. So King 4 applies to the government department and is a very important instrument as well. Then, of course, we also have a protocol on corporate governance in the public sector. I think the first time I worked on this document was during my first board appointment was in 2008. That was to the South African Maritime Safety Authority, which is in the maritime industry, international by character, of course. And the state also has this protocol on corporate governance. So effectively, if you're going to, for example, create a governance framework, whether for the province or for the specific department, you would have to start by looking at the protocol on corporate governance in the public sector. That would sort of become, your one of your critical documents to look at to create that environment. Otherwise, you'd be working, in silos, and outside of the law. Then, of course, you've got issues around enterprise risk, very critical. Issues around, accounting practices, how to go about this, issues about compliance practices, also important. And then, of course, you have the Companies Act insofar as the responsibilities of directors of, whether it's state-owned companies, provincial entities or municipal entities. The Companies Act becomes important and also is a critical, legislation in that act, in that sense, one of the drivers. And then, of course, the legislative prescripts. So what that would refer to, for example, founding legislation. If you have, say, for example, the Mpumalanga, a liquor authority or gambling board, I think you call them economic agency or something. There would be a legislation that establishes that organization. So that also becomes a critical instrument insofar. And then, of course, once you've dealt with the drivers, you then have the enablers, risk management, the directives from the government departments, PFMA directives in terms of, treasury regulations that come out. And then, of course, you have the players, starting from the green, going to your left there, the implementers, the accounting, officer, the DG, the CEOs of entities, and so forth, then line management. Then, of course, the people who support the implementers, your compliance officer, internal audit, your risk champions, and national treasury. And then when you move to the left of the slide and you move up, you now see also how important it is to have, the right tools, technology in place. In fact, King 3 was created because it wanted to address the issue of IT governance, which up until then was not so visible, within the King codes itself. So King 3 came in to say IT governance must become a standing agenda item on board meetings. And by default, of course, it means institutional meetings. So that, because most of our spend, especially in today's world, is around IT procurement and so forth. So it's very important that you have your IT frameworks in place, in terms of how do you go about making sure that whatever IT, infrastructure you invest in gives you value for money, gives you a return on investment, enables efficiencies within the organization, and ensures that there is risk management, around the use of IT. So IT is a very critical step, and you need to have those frameworks in place. And unfortunately for you, we have all those solutions.